Hello, and thank you again for joining us for another edition of Behind the Bench with Judge Ron Arnone. I'm Judge Arnone, your host, and today it's my great pleasure to have a really special guest in the studio, Congressman Tim Murphy. The Congressman is a very good friend of mine and a great leader in our region in the United States Congress. Today we're going to discuss a little bit about mental illness in our country today as well as in our communities. And there's no one better with regard to that as an expert in the field than Congressman Tim Murphy. Not only is he a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, psychologist, but also our congressman and a family man, and he knows more about this area than probably anyone. He's the foremost expert in the United States Congress in this issue. So we're going to have a lot of excellent questions to ask you, Congressman. And I see almost every day in our court, in the Magisterial District Court, all different levels of individuals. And oftentimes we see issues of mental health in the courts. And we really do need help on the front lines. And I applaud you for all your efforts in the new bill that you're trying to push through and all the hard work that you're doing on behalf of this problem. Can you tell us a little bit about your bill and
Sure.
some of the strong points that you'd like to see put through?
Thank you, Your Honor, for having me on this program to talk about a critically important issue. And one of the sad stories is that when someone has severe mental illness, the front line is often the courts and not a hospital. When we think of someone, for example, with a heart disease or heart attack, you don't really think in terms of having the police call them and going before the local district justice and deciding if they're going to go to jail. You get them to the hospital right away. You take care of their heart attack or diabetes or even someone in an auto accident. All those things are what you think of first. But what has happened in our country in the last few decades is we've made it more and more difficult for people with severe mental illness to get help until there is some act of violence. Let me tell you how it's gotten. About 40% of the time the first contact someone has with severe mental illness with a professional is the police. Isn't that bizarre that it comes out that way? It boggles the mind. Whereas, and you think of the number of new cases per year, 100,000 new cases per year emerging in a teenager of severe mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar illness, severe depression. And oftentimes it's a couple years before they get their first treatment. That is, parents, teachers, you may even see it, someone comes before you and say, Johnny's acting a little strange. Or they talk to the pediatrician and say, my son or daughter's losing their friends, they're isolated, they just kind of live in the basement at home, their grades are going down. And so people may try some things first before they really realize something's amiss.
So, Congressman, that's a great, I guess, lead into the idea of people getting involved in like medical doctors and counselors in schools and family members getting involved in making sure that they assess the situation so that we are dealing with it. Because, as you said, I mean, we see it so much in the courts, but also just in society in general. I mean, people are self-medicating.
Mm-hmm.
They self-medicate on alcohol and other illicit drugs, and all of a sudden it really becomes even more of a greater problem.
Great point. So you see that someone may come before you, the police may pick them up, and they may have, it might be a youth who was taking prescription drug medication from the medicine cabinet of a friend's house. Or maybe they got grandma's prescription, a notepad for OxyContin or some painkiller, and they filled it themselves. Comes before you. And a question we have to deal with is what's going on here? Well, first of all, we have an epidemic in this country with illicit drug use. Southwestern Pennsylvania is growing massively. The number of drug overdose deaths is huge. It's 43,000 a year, about 120 per day. And as you said so astutely, Your Honor, that some of these are self-medicating. It's the person who is distressed, depressed, distraught, and they're taking some drug to get around that. We're much better off identifying early on what are the psychological issues, and is this a sign of something more severe, and quite frankly, many times it is. But we also create barriers. I began investigating this after the shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary School, a tragic case. And in my role as I'm chairman of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee in Congress under the Energy and Commerce Committee. As we began to dig into this, we found several things. First of all, there's 112 federal agencies that deal with severe mental illness. 112, but they don't talk to each other. They're not coordinated. They're not even accountable. Only 30% of them have been evaluated for effectiveness, and quite frankly, a lot of those have been self-evaluated. You know, they ask the program, "How are you doing?" and they say, "We're doing fine."
Seems a lot of waste.
It's a lot of waste. You're absolutely right. It's a lot of waste. I mean, as taxpayers, as family members, we want to know, does it work or not? We also found that there is a strange rule in Medicaid that says you can't see two doctors in the same day. Now think about this. You may have a case, I mean, you tell me if this is how you handle it, but let's say, you know, a police or brought someone to you who's, you know, a teen causing some troubles, and you say, you know, maybe this kid needs to see a doctor. And so the pediatrician sees, yeah, this child is struggling with grades, getting more socially isolated, so crawling into the cracks. Now, if that person's on Medicaid and the pediatrician says, you know, we need to have Johnny or Mary see a psychiatrist right away if we think something's wrong. You're on Medicaid, you're not allowed to do that. You have to come back another day.
Wow.
But Children's Hospital Pittsburgh did an interesting study last year. They said that when you have that warm handoff in the office right away, 95% chance they're going to follow through on the appointment. But if you tell them to come back, it drops below 50%. So I'm thinking, we have to change this rule in Medicaid. Here's another strange rule. Remember Mayview Hospital? Wasn't that far long ago?
Sure, absolutely.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Western Center, gone. Woodville, they're gone. What we had was these old asylums, horrible places, where people could put anybody in there. You know, it's from unwed mothers, and you know, maybe if a member of your family didn't want them, or people with severe illness and severe mental illness. And they were supposed to be places of respite, of care. They became dumping grounds. We needed to close those houses of horrors. But what did we do in return? We didn't do anything. Yeah. We had 500,000 hospital beds in this country, psych hospital beds in this country in the 1950s, when the population of the country was 150 million. Now we only have less than 40,000 hospital beds, when the population is 316 million. So when someone has a severe mental illness, we oftentimes don't have a place to send them.
And Congressman, isn't it even true in our prison systems that there's so many individuals that are in prison or for violations or crimes that have mental illnesses that are untreated, and that's causing this prison population to increase because what your bill wants to be able to create and what you want to try to accomplish is bringing awareness to this problem and creating agencies that really are going to deal with it hands-on instead of what's going on currently.
Precisely. And it's increasing the prison population in two ways. One, just the raw numbers. So we see more mentally ill as homeless. The homeless population is growing. People who are taken to emergency rooms, that's growing. Arrests by police. Prison population is estimated between 20 and 40, in some cases over 50% mentally ill, some level of mental illness. But here's it. So that's part. More people going to jail. And maybe someone that's brought to you as a shoplifter and you say, okay, we're going to hold you over till your case is heard, so they're sitting in jail. What happens, however, if that person is then the victim of other assaults in the prison, or they get in a fight with a prison guard, and now they have a new charge upon them. You know, when you strike a police officer, does that move into a felony?
Sure, it starts stacking up.
So what we find is that a person with mental illness compared to a person without mental illness, same initial crime, the person with mental illness, time served will be 4 times longer. So there are more of them in jail. They're spending longer times. It's not where you give treatment for mental illness. You know, they may get isolated, which is not appropriate. So many problems occur, which makes the problems worse. Then they leave jail without any income, struggling more, end up homeless, and it is this downward spiral cycle.
So in fact, you know, it's if you look at the penal system and the rate of recidivism, in fact, we're seeing this as even a growing problem because we're not addressing the mental health issues. We're not addressing the drug issues, essentially. I mean, there are systems in place in the prisons that I think are effective, but they could be even more so if some of your measures were taken into consideration, such as, you know, there's behavior clinics that I can have people be evaluated. But how good are they? How well are they functioning and operating? And with your bill, I think that they would operate at a much higher level.
Sure. Well, here's the sad truth. They've cut we've cut funding so much of those programs that makes it tough for them to be effective. My bill would do a number of things. One, you could see 2 doctors the same day. 2, we would allow there to be more than 16 hospital beds in a facility. That's a strange rule Medicaid has. They only want 16 beds. That doesn't help us. You may need more than that. We want money to go towards programs that work. Now, you would think that's intuitively obvious, but there's barriers there as well that we need to have transparency and accountability for programs so people know what works. We also want to make sure that, for example, with community health centers, community mental health centers, they're allowed to have funding to use at the end of the fiscal year. You may notice sometimes that at the end of the fiscal year, you got to spend your money with federal programs. And so you go to some of these clinics, they say, we got $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 left. What can we do with that? They'll buy a couple pieces of furniture, they'll buy some more paper towels, they'll buy some more soap. When they're thinking, but if you let me carry that money into next year, I can use it to get another staff member.
Absolutely. And Congressman, I think a number of other important questions, but I think what a lot of people don't understand out in the general public is that all this money's being spent and so much more could be used in better places like you're illustrating. But in fact, I think people don't also realize that how much other money, like with crime and other issues, if we were addressing this in a better fashion, that we wouldn't have as many expenses incurred on the federal government and the state government.
Well, if you could compare the cost, now, obviously we don't want to be putting people in institutions, but when is necessary to give someone some days or weeks in a psychiatric facility with properly trained doctors there so we can get them stable on their medication, get them back out in the community and back in treatment, that's far cheaper than being in an emergency room. There's something called boarding, and that's when someone's brought to an emergency room and let's say they're very aggressive. And what may have to happen is a police officer or a nurse or a attendant has to be with them at their side. If they're still aggressive, they're tied to their gurney, maybe given some sedative. And we saw a federal report where it could be a few hours in there waiting for a hospital bed. It could be hundreds of days. Hundreds of days. And when that happens, you compare that cost of being in an emergency room bed at a couple $1,000s per day, or being in a jail for tens of thousands of dollars a year, or being in a psychiatric bed hospital for a few $100s a day. It's cheaper. And even less expensive is getting people in outpatient care in the community. So our bill would actually direct it to try and keep people out of the jail programs and other places to have communities, something called assisted outpatient treatment, where someone in your position would say, okay, here is John Doe. He's got a history of violence, a history of being in and out of jail. When he's not in treatment, he becomes homeless, he becomes incapable of handling himself. Diminished capacity to control himself, and all decisions you would have to make. I would like it to be a situation where you could say, with that black robe effect, you know what, John, we're going to help you. We're here out of compassion. I'm not going to coerce you, but I want to make sure you stay in treatment. So let's work this out. And what you would be mandating is say, the mandate for them to get treatment, not jail.
Absolutely.
What a different position that would be in for you to actually be thinking of saving lives. Now, Pennsylvania is one of 5 states that doesn't allow that. 45 other states have something called assisted outpatient treatment, which you can do that. I'd like to see all states adopt something like that.
Now, I do order evaluations
Yeah,
for drug and alcohol. I order even mental health evaluations. But I think what you're saying is having the appropriate measures in place, we can effectively allow for maybe an incident not occurring down the road where we're actually getting out ahead of these folks and helping them. But Congressman, what about people that don't want treatment? What about people that they don't seek it or want it? Or how do we deal with those?
That is a great question. I understand that people who have been treated badly in the old institutions wouldn't want to get into those snake pits. I wouldn't either. Who would? But what happens, let's separate that aside. We're not going to go back to those days. Let's go to the point of understanding what severe mental illness really is. A person, for example, with schizophrenia who's delusional, and understand what this means. This doesn't just mean that they think the CIA has planted electrodes in their brain and they may be hearing signals. They actually believe that's to be true in some cases. And in such cases, they may not even understand that they have an illness. So since delusions and hallucinations may be part of that, they're hearing voices. It's not to be feared. Understand that's part of their brain disease. But if other people say, ah, you're crazy, there's no voices, something's wrong there, that person's thinking, wait, I'm hearing voices, so maybe you don't understand it. And they make you feel a little paranoid about that. What we want to do is be compassionate and say, no, let's get you into care and take care of that. But if that person still refuses to understand that need for treatment, we call that anosognosia. That is, they are not aware of their own illness.
Right.
They may actually believe that they're the Messiah. They may actually believe that they're getting these commands to do certain things. If the current standard is, as you know, if they are in imminent danger of harming themselves or someone else, you can take action as a judge.
Sure.
But what happens if they're not in that imminent danger? Your hands are tied. My hands are tied as a clinician. What I think we need to be looking at here is, don't just say, well, that person has a right to be crazy, because I think that's almost a cruel way of treating people. Well, it's crazy, let him be
Right.
crazy. That's not it.
Yeah.
You don't want that to happen.
No, absolutely not.
Think of it this way. If someone, if we knew that there was in the streets of Bethel Park on a winter night an 80-year-old woman walking around in a bathrobe bare feet talking about how she has to get to school the next morning, you would know right away something's wrong.
Sure.
You'd say, this woman needs care.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't even question that. Probably think dementia, Alzheimer's, needs care, something's wrong with her brain.
Yes.
We need to understand the same thing with mental illness. When someone's to that level, it isn't a matter that they just want to be mentally ill. They don't, it doesn't matter they just want to be homeless, let them go. So we need that same kind of compassion to say, this person needs help. And I think when we reach that point, we'll have rediscovered the wheel here, because we're going
I agree, and I think that you know, unfortunately, our society in general is a little over-medicated. But let's talk about medication and how, you know, that correlates to treatment of these mental health issues. And in fact, I mean, you articulated quite well that, you know, a mental illness is not unlike, you know, breaking your arm or having a heart attack. It's an illness. It's an illness of the brain. It's a dysfunction. So let's talk about medications and how
Sure.
we can.
Well, medications can be helpful, but they should not always be used as much as they are now. So we call these psychotropic drugs. Antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety drugs can be very effective. Here's my caveat. 70% of psychotropic drugs are prescribed by non-psychiatrists. Psychiatrists are the ones trained in this field. I'm a psychologist. I don't write prescriptions. I provide therapy and counseling. Very valuable approach to helping people with a number of psychological disorders, and combination of medication, psychotherapy, optimal effectiveness. If someone is just writing prescriptions, such as saying, well, a person with heart disease has twice the risk for depression, doctor diagnosed you with heart disease, here, just take this antidepressant too. Well, that's inappropriate. If you don't have depression yet, why are you doing that? So the idea is make sure it's the right person prescribing it. Number two, make sure that's the right dosage, the right medication. These things can be monitored carefully. I see too many cases where someone gives a prescription and say, call me in 6 weeks, let me know how it is. The time of concern when you take an antidepressant, anti-anxiety, antipsychotic is when you first start taking it, where you're changing medications, your body getting used to it, your brain's getting used. Watch for those side effects. You really need to be in careful contact with your doctor or nurse to monitor you. And the many ones I know will contact on a daily basis.
And Congressman, isn't it true, and I've read many periodicals and studied this, and I know you know it inside and out, that a combination of psychotherapy and medications is the optimum, with regard to treatment?
Yes, you don't want to just have take the medication and good luck. Many of the cases you hear out of the VA, that's a problem, is when that's there. Here's your pills, and off they go. You end up with some risk for someone, and it's much more compassionate to be supportive and say, no, let's stick with the people who can help you with this. But medication can be helpful. What happens is if you start mixing it with alcohol, for example, now you got some serious problems. Serious mental illness and alcohol alone increases violence. That's a problem. You have people who doctors don't know all the other drugs they're on, so you may be getting some drugs from this doctor, drugs from this doctor. The person takes it. The doctors don't know because they don't look at each other's medical records. Now you've got complications. So, and then you got a person who is decompensating or having problems in jail, and now they're in your lap.
Right.
And all along you thought, gee, if only we could have got this person help all along, we could have prevented this. Once they do the crime, they got to do the time.
That's right.
Your hands are tied then,
yes,
right?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, that's quite true. You mentioned a good point, and I wanted to follow up on it. Mental illness and violence. How do the two correlate, and can you speak a little bit on that?
A great question, because you may have heard this statement that people with mental illness are no more prone to violence than people without mental illness? Yes and no. Some of these studies have, for example, look at people who are in treatment compared to those who are not mentally ill. If you're in treatment, stable, and compared to you're not mentally ill, you're really no more different. But if you look at people who are in treatment versus not in treatment, who are severely mentally ill, the people in treatment are 15 times less likely to be violent. 15 times less likely.
That's significant.
And other studies have looked at, I'm looking at some studies here
Sure.
that have occurred in Sweden and other places around the world, 2 or 3 times increased violence among people with severe mental illness. Now, I want to say this too. The biggest concern is people who are severely mentally ill are more prone to be victims of violence. A child, for example, with severe mental illness, 3 to 4 times more likely to be sexually abused. Another person may be 4 to 10 times more likely to be a victim of, again, there's the ones you see, rapes, assaults, robberies, cyber theft, identity theft, all those things where they're now coming to you as victims and they're mentally ill. Because we haven't provided the proper supports to them too. So there's a lot of issues here that I'm not one of those just say, oh, just because someone's mentally ill doesn't mean they're more violent. It depends. And if they're in treatment.
And with regard to all the studies that you've done, you know, in your tenure and your as a psychologist and therapist, and your time in Congress and all the things that you've seen in these several years of studies that have been kind of, you've evaluated to this point. We're learning different things, new things every day, aren't we?
Yeah.
And in fact, your bill allows for continued studies and observation of these programs, which I think we really need, because we are learning different things and new things each and every day. And so can you speak a little bit on that?
Well, what our bill does is really try and reorganize research. Because what we have found is a lot of the grants the federal government's been funding, no one's asked them to follow research designs, protocols, and present results. What we're going to do is several things. One, authorize $100 million into further brain research to help us understand this more. Research designs for some of the specific protocols that we know that work. One's called response after initial schizophrenic episode, where that's much more effective treatment. We want more grants to go to communities, what we call innovation grants, or also another one called demonstration grants, where communities that are using innovative ways of working with people with mental illness to get them direct services early on, follow up with them, evidence-based care. By evidence, I mean, as you were alluding to, the things that really work: medication prescribed by someone who knows what they're doing, psychotherapy given by someone who's trained in what they're doing. Very important. We can make a world of changes here, Judge, and in that process, get people more effective things. But there's a lot we need to know, and I'll tell you one major breakthrough that came last year in the area of severe mental illness. Last year, they identified a genomic model for schizophrenia. They identified 108 genetic markers for schizophrenia. This is huge. And in that, 8 different subtypes. And they also identified more genetic markers for bipolar illness, severe depression, and autism. We're much more advanced in understanding the genetic markers of autism than we ever were. And probably within a few years, we'll have this pretty clearly down. This is a major breakthrough. This will help us in understanding more treatment, early identification, prevention, focus on those at risk. It's pretty amazing.
It is amazing, and I have friends, and I've been involved in the autism spectrum of sorts in different capacities, and I've seen through therapy, and I've seen through active involvement in a child that has autism, if they have the appropriate therapy, that they develop quite well, and in fact are productive, almost productive members of society.
Yeah, there's a spectrum with that, as you know, and
Sure.
some sadly still remain severely disabled, and some pretty productive. But just think of this: when we get to the day we understand more of what the causes are, and what we can do early on, whether it's prenatally, still inside the mom, or other educational efforts, we're making advances quickly, and that's what we're going to keep pushing for. And our bill also pushes for a lot of research to make some changes in these areas.
That's excellent. And with regard to all the things that you've done with regard to making this your life's work, and the Mental Health Crisis Act and your vision, can you tell us a little more about the different feedback that you've gotten from your colleagues in Congress, and how they're reacting to this?
Sure.
To you who really is the guy that should be addressing this because you're the expert, but also to the idea that this is such a huge problem in the United States of America.
Well, the Helping Families and Mental Health Crisis Act is the true bipartisan bill in Congress. It has been endorsed by dozens of newspapers around the country, many professional organizations that recognize this is not a tweak. This isn't putting painting over rust. This is an overhaul bill of how we approach mental illness in this country and bring it into the 21st century. I'm pleased with the bipartisan support we've gotten. As we introduce it, we'll gather more votes. I'd love to see a vote this year and move this forward to being to change the system in America. But, Judge, I'll tell you the biggest endorsements coming from parents and family members around the country who are saying, I felt that there was no help and there was no hope for my son or daughter or father or mother, and now there is.
And you know, that's a great topic into the next leading question that I wanted to ask you, which is, you know, the rate of teen suicide is, the numbers are up. And I liken it to the idea of all this technology and everything that's going on, and how, you know, we need to get a hold of this and develop plans to try to stop this from happening. What are your thoughts to that end in dealing with that issue of teen suicide?
Well, suicide continues to grow in this country. When you look at the areas we've seen success in this country in the last 15 years, you've seen decrease in mortality rates for heart disease, stroke, HIV, AIDS, they're all going down. Auto accidents going down. All these things, mortality rates down. Suicide, up. Drug overdose deaths, up. So that tells us that the things that are being followed now with federal and state governments are not working. I'm exploring models that I'm looking at, for example, in the United Kingdom and Norway. They have different kind of models where they intervene much earlier in working with teens, making treatment more accessible. It isn't enough just to say, stop bullying. There's more to it than that. We have to train kids and hold accountability. Cyberbullying is a terrible thing, but also identifying depression early on, helping people understand these things is going to be important. But we need to also recognize there's aspects of depression and mental illness with this, which we're not addressing. The message to teenagers is, look, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Heck, Judge, you know, everybody faced miserable times when we were teenagers. I wouldn't want to live through that again.
No.
But you know what? We made it through.
We did.
And we need to send that signal to our youth today as well. You make it through this. There was help. There was hope. There was healing. And we can move forward on that. But they need to know where they can reach for help and the healing.
That's a great point. And in fact, you know, I have a lot of outreach programs that I do in the schools and in the community. And I know you do a lot of that too, with, you know, going and speaking to different groups and trying to get your message out there. I think that as leaders, that's what we need to do. We need to continue to do these outreach programs and continue to educate parents and kids on, you know, whether it be drug and alcohol issues, mental health issues, violence, domestic violence, whatever. I think programs where we have an open dialogue and a solid discussion about what the solutions are imperative to addressing these issues. Congressman, thank you so much for your time, for your efforts, for your great work on behalf of you know, the United States of America and certainly our region. I'm certainly honored to call you my friend, and please keep up the great work.
We'll keep it up. You too.
Folks, thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Beyond the Bench. We'll be back hopefully with another great guest like Congressman Tim Murphy. I'm District Judge Ron Arnone, and we'll see you again soon.